Thank you for that. It's at times like this when somebody reads out the blurb that's on your web page, you realize quite how fatuous your own web page is. So it's like, first note, change web page. So thanks very much for that introduction, and thanks to you all for being here, and thanks very much to the organising committee for having been in charge of what I think we can all agree is an extremely successful conference so far up to now. Right, this is where it's going to change. I can tell I'm not in France because things work and we start on time and things like that. So this is really nice. Okay, so Ed convinced us yesterday that subjective well-being is a useful concept and indeed is going to keep you alive. So that's a good thing. And also that other people's happiness is a good thing for you. So in that sense, well-being is sort of contagious. It's very much a social concept rather than an individual one only. Now, given that, we might wonder what policy can actually do about it. And Ed said that psychologists are really rubbish at policy. Well, it's true. Sorry about that. It is, and it's a bit true, and it's one of the things that psychologists worry about. Why don't psychologists have as much impact as economists? Well, maybe you wouldn't like to have as much impact as economists do when we get it wrong all the time. But anyway, there is more direct interest in economics in making policy statements. I do quite a lot of PhD defences. One of the things I like to ask in a PhD defence, and PhD defences in France are in public, in front of the family and in front of the friends and faculty members, and so the candidate can't leave or anything. I like to ask them, okay, you've got 5 minutes with the Minister of Happiness, the Minister of Employment, the Minister of Public Works, or with the President or with the Prime Minister or something. And I say, okay, in your 5 minutes, what would you say to her? What would you say to him? What would be the things you have to say that have to be done? And it's a great question. I recommend you use it in PhD defences because people fall to pieces when you do that, and they don't actually know. But anyway, we do worry about policy implications. And every economics paper sort of has to have a policy implications section, just like every psychology paper has to have a methods section. I got rejected once from a psychology journal with the reason being in the editor's report, your paper does not have a methods section. I was like, what is wrong with you? But anyway, it's okay. You need a methods section in psych, you need a policy implication section in economics. So that's what I'm going to do here. I'm going to think about what can the analysis of subjective well-being data tell us about a policy for happiness. And I'm going to have, I think, what's really quite depressing news for you. I'm going to look for areas of intervention that will produce lasting effects on societal well-being. And I've highlighted those two words. Lasting, because I'm going to talk about adaptation. Some things are good, but not for very long. You get used to them. Bigger houses and bigger cars are classic examples. Other things you don't get used to, and of course that's what we want. And also I'm going to look at societal well-being. And that sounds like a loose word, we all put in social when we don't really know what adjective we want to use. Societal well-being here, I mean the sum of all of us in this room, not just you as one person. The reason I'm making that distinction is that something that is good for you may well be bad for somebody else. So in that case, when we add all the effects up, we may well get 0. even though it's good for you. And that's a spillover effect, or what economists like to call a negative externality. Okay, let me move on from there. Because I'm an economist, I'm going to start with money. Oh no, I know what I wanted to say. Could I give you some economics jargon? I think you all need more economics jargon, right? Most of you aren't economists. Okay, so externalities is one thing. We love to use the word externalities. It's just great shorthand for what I do affecting you. Societal well-being, this means we cannot make policy using a representative agent. Okay, I can't take one person and do policy based on that one person, because what happens to that one person will affect other people as well. Okay, and that's a direct consequence of there being externalities. Okay, so if you want to really impress people at dinner parties or down the pub or things like that, just say, well, there's no representative agent, and just, it's a surefire winner. It always works for me. Okay, so let's get back to the presentation before I run out of time, actually. Let's get back to the presentation. I'm an economist. I'm going to start with money. Money is of course, important. And it is correlated with subjective well-being, but as I'm going to argue, not in a terribly useful way. And specifically, I want to insist that the effects of income are not permanent, they're temporary, and that you getting a pay rise is good for you, but it's not necessarily good for everyone else. Okay, so I'm going to argue actually that money fails this test of having a lasting effect on societal well-being. I don't think it's going to work. So let me show you how. And that's going to be the first part of the talk. The second part of the talk is if money doesn't work, well, what does then? And this is where it actually gets quite depressing, because there's not that much out there that I think passes the test. But this is an area which is wide open for research, as Ed said yesterday. And this is where we need much more work. And especially, and I'll come back to this right at the end, especially work that is not on OECD countries. Right, we're all bored with hearing about the well-being of West Germans. I don't want to do any more papers on West Germany, I really don't. But that's what I have to do, because that's where the data is. So that's a discussion we can have. Okay, so well-being and money, the absolute, I think, god of this area, in economics at least, is Dick Easterlin from the University of Southern California. And Dick asked two questions. Are rich people, or countries, happier than poor people, or countries? And secondly, as countries become richer, do people become happier? Now, the quick-witted amongst you, especially those who've taken Economics 101, will have realized that that is a statement about elasticity. Okay, there's another word you can use, right? Elasticity. How one thing changes when another thing changes. The response of Y to X, as you like. The first question here is a cross-section elasticity statement. If I'm richer than you, am I happier than you? And the second one of these is a time series elasticity statement. As you become richer, do you become happier? Because these are, in some sense, the same question, we might expect the answers to be the same. And this turns out not to be the case. So let me give you an illustration of this using one country that experienced absolutely unprecedented income growth in the starting in the 1950s, early 1960s, and that's Japan. Japan, in the late 50s, early 60s, was a low-middle income country. And let me see if I can... I tried to do the clicker earlier, and I turned the whole presentation off. No, here we go. So Japan is here, where the big red arrow is, actually. So Japan was... it's not a poor country, but it's low-middle income in the early 1960s. Japan is a little bit less rich than Poland. It's a little bit richer than Cuba at that point in time. Okay, that's the first thing to know. The second thing to know is that rich countries are happier than poorer countries. And this is a plot that I took from Ruud Veenhoven, showing that relationship, and that's given by the blue tram lines. Okay, that shows you the average relationship between GDP per capita, that's our measure of income at the country level, and average happiness on the y-axis. So the question here is what happens to Japan as Japan becomes richer? So as Japan becomes richer, it moves to the right, and you'd expect it to follow these tram lines and become like the USA, richer and happier. And it certainly did have an increase in GDP per capita, unprecedented at that time. And over a 25-year period, from 62 to 87, so that's roughly one generation, we're talking about an increase in real GDP per capita of a factor of 3.5. So for every dollar your parents had, in real terms, you've got $3.5. I mean, that was astonishing growth. It's the kind of growth that we'd never seen before in that kind of well, maybe in the industrial era, maybe in the UK in the early 1800s. But certainly in the 19th century, 20th century, we haven't seen anything like it. Of course, now we have a new champion. That champion in terms of real GDP per capita growth would be, I'm sure you can all guess, it's China. And China, over a 22-year period, had an increase in real GDP per capita that wasn't 3.5, it wasn't 5, it wasn't 10, it's 11. So for every dollar the parents have, the kids have got 11 real dollars, and of course that growth has come at a price, and we can talk about that. Anyway, so here was Japan. Japan has suddenly become 3 to 4 times richer. What happens now? And what happens now is nothing like the blue lines. In fact, what happens now is nothing. Japan doesn't get any happier at all, despite this increase in resources that's absolutely enormous. And the challenge to social science is to understand why that happened. How on earth could this be the case, that we have such huge growth, and growth in all the things we think are important, like healthcare and cars and housing and consumption and what have you, without any increase in happiness at the country level? And that is, actually, sorry, just to go back to this is the Easterlin paradox. Okay, the Easterlin paradox is that the blue lines don't look like the black line. Okay? So rich countries are happier than poorer countries, but as a country becomes richer, it doesn't become any happier. So that's kind of weird, and we want to know why. So what kind of answers can we bring to this debate? The first thing we can say is, well, you know, the Japanese, kind of strange. You know, who knows what the hell is going on there? But, you know, the Japanese may well be strange, but the Americans are pretty weird as well, right, Ed? I mean, Ed's with me on this one. They're a pretty strange nation. But they've got exactly the same thing going on there. And you can see a rise in GDP per capita at the end of the 20th century here of certain size. It's almost doubling from 20,000 to 40,000, accompanied with no trend whatsoever in general social survey data. So that's not it. It's not that the Japanese are weird. It seems to be happening in other places as well. So let me skip that, otherwise we'll never get to the end. One answer to this question, okay, if the Japanese are weird, maybe their surveys are just kind of odd. Right, and this is a good point. It's raised by Betsy Stevenson and Justin Wolfers about 8 years ago now in a Brookings paper. And I think this is worth saying. We all know the golden rule of survey data, right? A golden rule of questionnaires is don't mess with the questions, okay? Start with the question, stay with it. Don't change the question. So that lesson doesn't seem to have been completely learned by the people who are doing the Japanese GSS. And as Justin and Betsy say, and quite rightly so, there are actually 4 different questions over time in Japan. One starting in the late 50s, going up to the late 60s, and so on and so on. And it turns out that as you change the format of the question, every time the answers drop down for whatever reason. That's just the way it turns out. So if you look at any one of these periods, there's a positive relationship. So as the country gets richer, people do get happier, apart from this last period, when we don't really know what's going on there, apart from this last period here, okay? But if you drew a line across all of these, it would, of course, be pretty much flat. So that's a good thing to say. That's a fine thing to say. But that does not apply to all other countries. And Stevenson and Wolfers agree that there is no trend in life satisfaction in the US. Okay, so that was Dick Easterlin's reply to Stevenson and Wolfers was that, hey, what about the GSS? And they say, okay, yeah, we can't explain that. But they come back. This is like a boxing match, right? So Stevenson and Wolfers too come back and say, but hey, there is a positive trend in life satisfaction in the World Values Survey. Then Dick comes back, number 3, and says that this is also results from a change in the way the happiness question was administered, and you have this problem with the recovery of transition countries. This is the Eastern European transition countries. And anyway, if you look at the analysis, it all fails a jackknife test. If you take out 1 or 2 points, the whole thing falls to bit. So there's been this real coming and going and coming and going. Is there a flat trend in well-being or not? Well, for what it's worth, this is the sort of recent data we've got in the big panels that we tend to work on. This is data from the UK. Real GDP per capita and life satisfaction, both trended and untrended. You can see it's flat, life satisfaction. Same thing in Germany, same thing in Australia, same thing in Europe. There doesn't seem to be a trend in life satisfaction as economies get richer. So I think that after having read a lot of these papers, I've kind of lost the will to live. I just can't read any more of this stuff. And there's a number of reasons why I don't want to read any more time series happiness data pieces. And the first is it's really time series happiness data, which means that you are making these incredibly strong statements about sometimes 9, 8, or on one memorable occasion, 4 data points. I mean, this is just so underpowered statistically. The second reason is there's never any control variables. So you're comparing happiness in the US in 1970 to happiness in the US in 2010, or equivalently happiness in Japan in 1958 to that now, with no taking into account changes in education, changes in immigration, changes in average age. People, I mean, it kind of sounds weird to say that, but people are on average older now than they were in the past. They used to die earlier in the past, that kind of thing. Differences in female labour force supply, differences in fertility, marital status. These have all been huge. None of this is taken into account. And the last reason is there's never any macro control variables like inequality, crime, pollution, what have you. So I don't want to do that anymore. And I instead want to ask the question backwards. What kind of individual level theories do we have that could explain why more income doesn't make you happier? And I'm going to appeal to the notion of relative utility. So I've got some kind of welfare function or well-being function that depends both on my income and a kind of comparison level, Y star. And the idea here being, it's a very broad idea that I compare to you and you compare to me. Okay? So as I get richer, Y goes up, that's a good thing. As you get richer, Y star goes up and I feel relatively deprived. I feel less relatively rich. And this is just the kind of externality that I was talking about. I compare to you, you compare to me. And under certain parameterizations of that comparison, as we all get richer, nobody gets happier. That's what I want to talk about. Okay. So this is a common idea in social sciences that we compare to each other. These comparisons can be over money or they can be over things. And one infamous one is cars. Take an example of two people, A and B. They live next to each other. They both like cars. We can imagine their well-being functions as looking like this. I know some people in the audience very much like cars, for example. And you're really happy to have a nice big car and it looks beautiful and this kind of thing. So, okay, that's just a general statement. The key question in social science is if A and B live next to each other and B buys a new car, what does A do? And the classic economics answer is nothing. Why should A care? Why do you care what your neighbor did, what your work colleague did, you know? You've got this car, it's nice, whatever, or you've got a new car, it costs a certain price. None of this is changed by the fact that your neighbor has just bought a 7 Series BMW. Okay? None of this should change. But of course it does change. And people actually are responsive to the carness of their neighbors. And I sometimes try to explain this to economists, and they're like, bullshit, come on, that doesn't happen, you know, nice story, but luckily enough, we have the Dutch, right? And the Dutch are like a really strange bunch of people, because they're all, I'm like really short in, if I go to Holland, I'm really short, right, because the average Dutch person is like this tall. And they do all kinds of weird things, one of which is they run a lottery. And that's not weird in itself, but the way they do it is really odd. So you know how lotteries usually work? I mean, I guess have you got a Singaporean lottery, actually? Or do you not need one because you're so rich anyway? I mean, it's just asking, okay? So normally the national lottery, like the lotto in the UK, or the one in France, you go and you buy a ticket, you wait for the, the TV show, the numbers come up, and then you throw your ticket away because you haven't won. That's the way this usually works. The way it works in Holland is different. You buy a ticket, sure, but what they draw is not a ticket number, they draw a postcode. Okay? If you live in that postcode, and you've got a ticket, you win. If you live in that postcode and you didn't buy a ticket, nada, you don't get anything. So it's postcode level based. And of course they weren't thinking about this when they set this lottery up, but this is a classic 2x2 RCT design, randomized control design. This is absolutely fantastic. This is what we want, because we've got winners and losers. And we've got players and non-players. And this is exactly what we want to compare. We want to compare non-players who were in a winning postcode lottery to non-players who were in a losing postcode lottery. And what you win is actually quite substantial here. The tickets cost about €6, excuse me, and you win about 12,500 euros per ticket, plus one participating household in the winning postcode gets a new BMW, and this is where I'm going with this story. Okay, postcodes are small. You've got about 20 households per postcode. Okay, so this is the experiment. You live in postcode whatever the hell it is. You didn't buy a lottery ticket. Your postcode's drawn. Your neighbours who've bought tickets are getting 12,500 per ticket, plus one of them's got this new BMW. What do you do? I mean, you swear a lot, obviously, and that kind of stuff. But what you can do also, and this is what Kuhn and co-authors did, These guys are all, they're almost all Dutch, actually. Peter Koon's not, I don't think. Anyway, what you could do is go and survey households 6 months after the lottery is drawn, and you can ask them things like, how happy are you, and all the other, the standard demographic stuff you ask people in surveys. But you can also ask them, oh, by the way, have you bought a new car in the past 6 months? And you can see what's going to happen, right? This is the result. That non-participants, that's people who didn't buy tickets, in winning postcode areas are significantly more likely to have bought a car than non-participants in non-winning postcode areas. So that's the glory of the 2x2 design, okay? I didn't buy a ticket, and neither did you. My postcode won, yours didn't. What have I done? I've gone out to buy a new car. Why is that? Yeah, what else can it be? One of my neighbors has got a BMW. So this actually comes through in experimental data. And this is the idea I want to bring to you in terms of not only income, but also lots of other things. So let me move on with that. Okay. And I'm going to look at mostly evidence that comes from subjective well-being, things like job satisfaction, life satisfaction, and so on. But I don't think I need to describe that to this audience. Because I'm looking at comparisons, I need to say to whom do you compare. I'm going to look at a whole different bunch of kinds of comparator groups. And these are some of the examples. You can think to yourself, to whom do I compare? And when we run surveys of this, it's quite often work-based. Your work colleagues, because those are people you actually interact with more than others. Okay. This is a bit of what's known as shameless narcissistic self-promotion, which I'm quite happy to share with you now. This is one of my earlier pieces on well-being and income. Now, Whiting said to me, no regressions, don't do regressions, okay? I haven't got that many, right? But this is just a multiple correlation, right? So don't be scared of it. You all know what a correlation is, right? This is just a multiple correlation where I'm correlating with multiple things at the same time. So the thing we're interested in here is whether these numbers are positive and, in some sense, how large they are. What this number shows you is that people who earn more are happier. What this number shows you, because it's negative, is that people whose peer group earns more are less happy. And this peer group is people who look like you. People of the same age, same education, same sex, doing the same kind of job. And that was one of the first pieces we did on comparison income. So I get a pay rise, that's good. You get a pay rise, that's good for you. It's bad for me. That's the idea. It's a comparison, a social comparison of income. You might think that that kind of comparison only really happens with people you don't know very well. But it turns out it happens within the household as well. And this is another piece of work looking at the same data, the BHPS, British Household Panel Survey, but instead looking at my income and the income of my spouse. And the key variable here is this one with the circle around it, and that's a dummy variable for me earning more than my partner. And the way you can interpret that is I like earning more, and that's especially good if I earn more than my partner does. Okay? So this idea that your partner comes home from work and says, gee, honey, I got this big pay rise, and I'm now going to be earning like more than you. You're like, oh, that's great. That's a great piece of news. Oh, damn it. Because you feel relatively deprived again, and we've replicated this. Lastly, to whom do you compare? You can also compare to yourself in the past. Okay? This is another comparator group. How do I know if my salary is good now? Well, I think it's kind of good because it's more than I used to get. So this is the idea of comparisons within individual over time. And of course, that's just another way of saying adaptation. Okay? That's exactly the same statement. Again, it's BHPS data. And again, the more you earned in the past, this is 1 year ago, we've lost the O there. the more you earned 1 year ago, the less satisfied you are now, as if you get used to higher income. And for those of you who are kind of geek, statistically minded, which I am, I love this kind of stuff, the coefficient on my own pay and the coefficient on the pay I used to get 1 year ago are equal and opposite. That means pay rises make you happy for less than 1 year, okay? And then you go right back to where you were to start with. So that's this idea of temporary versus permanent. All right. So when we look at the effect of own pay and others' pay, we find the following. And now some people say, well, money doesn't make you happy. This is not true. Money makes you happy as long as you get it and nobody else does. That's the key to happiness here, right? So money is social, like many other things. So the effect of my own pay on my own happiness is positive as long as other people's income doesn't change. The flip side is that as people's income changes, my well-being goes down. And in some of the work we've done, these effects cancel each other out so that as everyone gets happier, as everyone gets richer, no one gets happier. That's the kind of problem we're looking at with money. It's a socially defined determinant of well-being, and it looks like it might cancel out. Okay, and this has been replicated really quite a lot of times now using data from different kinds of countries. The finding with respect to my own income means that my own past income means that the effect of a pay rise is positive, but not for very long. So you get a pay rise, that's good, back down you go, and you're back to where you started. Wages are habit forming, okay? We adapt to them. So this is my first piece of policy. It's a shame we don't have the Chancellor here anymore. How do you keep your faculty at UniSim happy, you might wonder? Well, here's how to do it, right? You need to start at a low wage and then progressively increase. Okay, so if you've got a fixed number of dollars you want to pay someone, you should start low and end high. Okay, you want to backload salary. So if there's any junior faculty here who are wondering quite why your pay is so bad, this is it, right? Thanks to the economists. You're very welcome. Okay, it's going to get better, right? All right, I should move on. So these are these kind of comparison effects can, of course, explain the Easterlin paradox. People who are rich, well, there's two things. They're rich, they've got a lot of money. That's good. But they're also rich, they've got more money than other people. That's the relative component. So that's doubly good. But as everyone gets richer over time, arguably nobody becomes richer than anyone else. You know, in the same way that there's still only 3 medals at the Olympics in each discipline, even though we've had the modern Olympics for 120 years. Or a statement I sometimes say in class when I think my students aren't listening, which is often. Say something like, after 70 years of progress after World War II, there are still 10% of people in the bottom decile of the income distribution. And they're like, oh, what a scandal. We need to eradicate poverty now. But, it's 10% in the bottom 10%. There's always 10% in the bottom 10%. You can't change things like that are rank-based. That's the kind of point I want to make. Okay, I'm going to run out of time, so I'm going to do this in just 5 minutes. A lot of people don't like happiness data. No one in this room, of course. But some people don't like happiness data. A lot of your referees won't like happiness data. So can we think of other ways of showing that the effect of income on well-being is relative rather than absolute? Let me just go through 1 or 2 different ways here, one of which I want to do because it's a tip of the hat to Bernard van Praag. This was the subject of Bernard's PhD dissertation in 1968. So a certain number of years ago now, and what's now known as the Leiden approach. Instead of taking someone who earns a certain income and asking them, are you happy? This inverts the question. It says, if you were to be this happy, how much money would you need? And then if you were to be a bit less happy, how much money would you need? And if you were to be thoroughly miserable, how much money would you need? And you fill in answers to these kinds of questions. This is a UK one with the questions being in sterling. So you've got 6 answers or 7 answers or 9 answers, 11 answers for each individual. You can look at those numbers and try to figure out who needs more money to be happy. And you can estimate what Bernard calls the welfare function of income. And there's a long literature on this going through the 60s, 70s, and 80s that's really, really very, very good. To cut a long story short, you find out that the people who need more money to be happy are those whose reference group has a higher income, so who live with people who have higher income, as it were, and who've earned more in the past. So that's exactly the same result as we had for satisfaction. If my reference group is richer, I then say I need more money in order to be happy. If I've had a higher income in the past, I say I need more money in order to be happy. And that's just an illustration of that log-normal shift, whereby a certain income gets you less and less happiness as your mu here, the mean of your distribution, increases. All right. We can also use hypothetical preferences. What kind of island would you like to live on? Would you like to live on Island A, where you earn 50 and other people earn 25? Or Island B, where you earn 100 and other people earn 200? Prices are the same in both islands. What would you prefer? Hypothetical preference. Okay? Individuals say they have a marked preference for A over B. You might just think that's something that's called social desirability bias, whereby you're just trying to make yourself look like a nice person and not a total money grabber, and you're interested in other things rather than cash, where of course we're all not, we're terrible consumerists. You can ask this question about cars and you get the same thing. People like having a relatively good car. You can ask it about houses. You get the same phenomenon. People like to have a bigger house than other people, rather than a big house in its own right. If you ask it about weeks of holiday, and maybe this is something that resonates amongst Americans and amongst Singaporeans, if you ask this about weeks of holiday, so you get 6 weeks of holiday, other people get 4, you get 8 weeks of holiday, other people get 12, you go for the 8 weeks of holiday and never mind what everyone else has got, right? So some things are comparative, others are not. And we talk about the degree of positionality of different kinds of consumption goods. Okay, you can look at this experimentally in the lab. The ultimatum game. Usually I don't have to explain what the ultimatum game is, but maybe some people don't know it. I've got $10. I can share it with you. One of you. Has to be one of you. I share it with one of you. I make a proposition to you. Let's say I offer you $2 and I keep 8. You can accept that proposition. You take $2, I get 8. Or you can refuse it, in which case nobody gets anything. The money disappears. Now the subgame perfect Nash equilibrium here is that I offer you 1 cent and you say, oh, thank you so much. And you take 1 cent because I'm giving you money for free. If you do this in the lab, offers of $1, offers of $2 are typically refused. People will throw money away, okay? I'm trying to give you $2 and you say, get the hell out of here. I don't want that. Why don't you want it? Because it's unfair. What's unfair about it? I've got more. So that's a comparative, there's only one way of understanding that. It's a comparative income result. You're comparing to me. That holds when we're sharing $10. It holds when we're sharing 100 as well. This is not a small stakes phenomenon. Okay, let me skip that. Okay. Number C, I've got to mention this because this is by my PhD supervisor, Andrew Oswald, quite a little known paper in some sense, whereby they did standard economic experiments and numbers of people in the lab, some earn lots of money, some earn less, the usual kind of thing. It depends on luck, it depends on your decisions. And at the end of the experiment, they said, okay, now we've got a new unannounced last session. Would you like to burn other people's money? Okay? And you can burn this person's money, and it will cost you 10 cents for every dollar you burn. Or it will cost you 25 cents for every dollar you burn. Much to their surprise, people loved this, thought this was brilliant. So half of all earnings were burnt in this way. So in that sense, if we allowed people in Singapore to wantonly destroy each other's property, GDP will go down by 50%, okay? And even if it costs them money, they would do that. That's what they want to do. And of course, it's rich people get burnt more than poor people. Again, you're using your own resources to make somebody else poor, okay? It's a positionality. We're not going to have time to do that. It's a positionality argument. Experiments can be in the lab. They can be lucky natural experiments. And here we have the state of California to thank. The state of California decided that any public employee's earnings is public knowledge. And of course, all the UCal state system guys and girls are public employees. They're civil servants. And you can go and look up how much where's David Card? He's at Berkeley. You can go and look up how much David Card earns. You can do it this evening. It's very easy to do so. David Card's a very well-known applied labour economist, by the way. That's why I'm saying that. And this is one of his papers. So what David Card and co-authors did was send an email to to a group of people, a subset of people at 3 UCal campuses, and say, oh, by the way, did you know you can click on this website and find out what all state employees earn? That was their intervention. It's what's known as an intention to treat, because some of the people wouldn't have clicked on the link. Other people would have clicked on the link anyway because they knew about it beforehand. So all of these estimates are biased towards zero, again, if you're econometrically minded. Some time after that, some days later, they sampled everyone on the UCal campuses and asked them questions about their happiness and their intentions to quit their jobs. What they found was people who'd received the email were systematically less happy than people who hadn't received the email. People who received the email were systematically more likely to want to quit their job than people who hadn't received the email. And this effect was particularly strong for those people at the bottom of the income distribution. Now, it's really easy to get this paper wrong. What this paper is not saying is low-paid people are unhappy. That's not what it's saying. What it's saying is low-paid people who find out they're low-paid are significantly less happy than low-paid people who don't particularly know they're low-paid. Okay? So you're holding your income constant. This is an information treatment where you suddenly find out where you stand relative to everyone else. And it's not a particularly pleasant experience. And actually, public information here reduces well-being. Okay? And this is why, I don't know, in some countries you have pay secrecy. People will not tell you how much they earn, and perhaps for these reasons. Okay, let me finish up with income, and then I'll just spend 10 or 12 minutes telling you about other things we could do. So income's a complete failure so far, right? On all of these kinds of approaches, income doesn't make you happier. Well, it does, but once everyone gets it, it's not any better than when nobody got it. Here's the last piece of evidence, and I think this is really quite cool. Can anyone see blue dots here? Oh, great, this usually never works. Great. Right. So this is a nice big screen. Thank you, Sim. So this is a neuro experiment by a mixture of neurologists and economists at the University of Bonn. And they ran an experiment with volunteers who accidentally bump into each other in the waiting room. Of course, they don't accidentally bump into each other. It's to make sure that you realize the other person is a person, not a computer. And then they go into an MRI scanner. You go into an MRI scanner, you lie on your back, you look up at a screen, you see blue dots. The blue dots go away, there's a figure, 24. You've got to say how many blue dots you saw. No cheating and counting, by the way. You've got to say how many blue dots there were. Were there fewer than 24 or more than 24? You give your answer, you wait, and then you get the outcome. If you get it right, whoops, that's you. If you get it right, you get a certain amount of money, experimental currency units. If you get it wrong, you get 0. The trick here is that you're informed whether you got it right and how much you earn, but also whether the other person got it right and how much he earned. These are all men. And as you can guess, the experimental treatment here is to mess around with these numbers. Okay. So these are the contrasts. We should only look at the grey area here when both people get it right. In one condition, C6, you get 60, the other guy gets 120. In C8, you get 60, the other guy gets 60. In C11, you get 60, the other guy gets 30. These are repeated tests with the same individual over time, okay? You get it right, you get a reward, but you also get information on the other person's reward when they get it right. What we want to know is what happens in your brain between C6, C8, and C11. Do you evaluate things relatively? And the answer is yes. They're looking at bold oxygen flow, so blood oxygen level dependence, in various voxels. Those are three-dimensional pixels in the brain, particularly looking at the ventral striatum, which is the area of the brain that evaluates reward. And these are the results. 60 versus 120 versus 60-60 versus 60-30. There's a monotonic difference in the amount of blood that's flowing to your ventral striatum. And when it's 60-30, the blood's pumping in there because this, your brain's saying, "Whoa, hey, I like that. That's good." When it's 61-20, there's less blood flowing there. It's the same way as if you're looking at your muscles in your body and you want to know which muscles you're using. You look at where the blood is going. When you're running, it's going to your legs. You're doing pumps, it's going to your arm. Same thing here. You look at where the blood is going in the brain. When more of it's going to the ventral striatum, that means you think it's a good thing. So it's not only what you say, it's also how your brain works. This doesn't seem to be some kind of social conditioning. This is what's going on inside your brain. We evaluate stuff relatively. Okay, so let me turn to the last bit, which I'm going to run through quickly. I think the effect of money on well-being is, to a large extent, comparative. And we don't need more money. And that's not a philosophical statement. I'm saying we don't need more money because I don't think it'll make us happier. And I believe that's the evidence we have from rich countries. Of course, I'm not talking about poor countries here. So, in a public policy sense, where does that leave us? GDP's no good, so what should we be doing? Well, some things we can't do anything about. We can't do anything about gender, even though we know there are significant gender differences in well-being that are actually quite unclear. Life satisfaction's in one direction, stress is in another. We can't do anything about age. We can't make people older. We can't make people younger, actually, more to the point. And as you may well know, there's a satisfaction smile, whereby well-being falls and then goes up again before it drops off in somewhat later life. And we don't know, actually, what's behind this U-shape. I don't know if Ed has got a good idea about this. I'm actually kind of stuck on this. I'm not quite sure what this reflects. One of the reasons I'm not sure is that we can replicate this U-shape on great apes. So this is a fantastic paper by Andrew Oswald in PNAS, looking at the happiness of chimpanzees, orangutans, and great apes as a whole. And of course, we don't make orangutans answer questionnaires, but you may not know this. I didn't know this until I read this paper. Every great ape has its own designated handler. Okay, that's the person who takes care of that ape, whether it be a chimpanzee or an orangutan. So you can ask questions of the handler, and you can ask them, and I believe this is one of the great questions in social science. If you were your ape, how happy would you be today? And this is the pattern they get. It's U-shaped again. And it's just hard to know what's behind this. There is an argument about the functional grandparent that some of you may have heard. There are 2 points in life where you need to be doing well: when you get kids and when your kids get kids. And in between time, you can just take time off, right? So maybe that's it. I don't know. Okay. What can we do about policy then? Well, we could think about looking at the labor market, looking at marriage, looking at freedom, health, religion, all these kinds of things. Certainly, the labor market matters for well-being. The unemployed are less happy than everybody else, certainly much less happy than the employed. But do they get used to it? And is unemployment relative? Well, if you look at the well-being loss from unemployment and plot it against the regional unemployment rate, you can most definitely see a negative relationship here. Unemployment hurts less in high unemployment regions. Okay, so there is a social norm of unemployment, but it almost never gets to zero. Okay, it's always bad. I think the story here is that unemployment is less bad in high unemployment regions. So there are social comparisons of unemployment, and that echoes the epidemiology literature that the unemployed commit suicide less in high unemployment areas. It's the same kind of thing. You don't adapt to unemployment, though. You enter unemployment. These are times, is panel data within individual from the German Socio-Economic Panel in a long project I did with Ed some years ago. These are people before they become unemployed. They become unemployed, and then we follow them while they remain unemployed. Their well-being goes down and stays down. There's no bouncing back. Unemployment starts bad, it stays bad. Okay, so I think unemployment is actually quite a good aim for public policy, but it's one of the only ones that I know. Marriage and divorce is another important social phenomenon. This is the trend in the UK, where both marriage and divorce seem to be progressively disappearing over time, and we're shortly going to have more divorces than we have marriages. What can we say about well-being and marriage? Well, the effect, it's positive, but only for about 12 months. Okay, so getting married is a good idea, but not for very long. These are Germans, right? And who the hell knows what happens in Germany. But divorce is, well, a good idea, essentially. For those who wish to divorce, well-being goes up after divorce and is significantly higher in the divorce period than it is in the unhappy marriage, and that holds for women as well, although less strongly so. And even widowhood, you find this big bouncing back. It's obviously a terrible experience, but there is recovery from widowhood. Children, terrible idea, as you know. Thinking about having kids, good idea. Having kids, bad idea. Okay, so this actually, I think, is where the literature on well-being and children is going, is these things are positively correlated, but that's mostly showing you that it's happy people who have children in the first place. It's a reverse causality argument. The effect of children on happiness is small to zero, okay? Maybe when you get older, I mean, when they're like 30, does this get better, by the way? Okay, thanks. I've got teenagers. Teenage girls. Oh, disaster. Anyway. All right. I've actually changed my mind about partnership. If you remember this marriage graph here, this is about getting married, becoming legally married. That doesn't do much for you, but having a partner does. And of course, that's more and more salient in a world where people are partnered for a long time before they get married, or indeed they're partnered and they never get married. We find not that much adaptation to partnership. Still in Germany, there's some evidence of it, but in the UK and Australia, there's no evidence of adaptation to partnership. So I've kind of changed my mind about marriage a little bit. Partnership is a good thing. Okay, I'm going to finish in, I don't even know who's chairing this, me probably. So I'm going to finish in about 5 minutes. Divorce. Let me finish with 3 things. Divorce. Divorce is a good thing for people who do it, but of course in a cross-section sense, divorcees are less happy than married. But we know that the unemployed are happier in high unemployment regions. What about divorcees? Are they happier in high divorce regions? This is a map of well-being in the United Kingdom, and the darker areas are happier. That's London, where we're all miserable. I'm a Londoner. And that's Wales, where everyone's miserable as well. That's a map of divorce. And there's been quite strong evolution of divorce over time. Between over a 15-year period here, you can see there's a great increase in divorce in the UK. We want to know if these 2 things are actually related to each other. So in the same way as asking whether the unemployed are happy in high unemployment regions, this regression asks whether divorcees are happier in high divorce regions, and indeed they do seem to be so. And you might think that's a more fish in the sea effect. You know, you're divorced and then you've got more people you can try to repartner with. And it turns out that this effect entirely comes from men who are happier when there are more divorced men in the region. And I don't think this is from people changing sexuality. I think this is just like there's more people to go fishing with and go down the pub with and all this kind of thing. All that stuff we do in the UK. Okay, that's the first thing I wanted to say. I've got 3 more things to say now. I forgot about poverty. We adapt to higher income. What about adapting to lower income? What about adapting to poverty? Poverty looks like unemployment. You enter poverty, you go down. You stay poor, you stay down. Okay, there's no adaptation to poverty. So I think poverty enters as number 2 on my list of things we could do something about as policymakers in a well-being sense. Okay, I'm going to skip that. Let me finish up with 2 things that are arguably quite fun, one of which is health. We think that well-being is comparative with respect to money. What about health? Is your health a comparative input into well-being? Does it matter how healthy other people are? And you may have seen findings like this, that if I share health problems with others, those health problems seem less important to me. Or something, I love this finding, this is another Blanchflower and Oswald finding, that individuals feel less overweight in heavier regions. So people around you look a bit bigger, you feel kind of smaller. And if any of you have been to the south of the US, I mean, I feel so good in the south of the US, it's great, you know. So anyway. Obesity has been increasing in the UK. And you know that the UK, Great Britain, or whatever you want to call it, has been in terminal decline for about 220 years now. But we are still a top 10 country. We're a top 10 country. We're number 10 in world obesity. So we're pretty proud of that. US is knocking in there at number 5, 32.2% of obesity. That's probably a bit higher now, actually. we want to know what is the relationship between body weight and well-being. I'm sorry, these slides are in French. What they're showing you here is the well-being of people. This is femme poids normal. So this is women of normal weight. That's the WHO definition. Don't blame me for this. Normal weight is between 18.5 and 25 on the body mass index. This is their well-being with a normal weight man, an overweight man, and an obese man. So slightly higher when you have an slightly higher when you have an overweight partner. For women who are overweight themselves, they're happiest with an overweight partner. And for women who are obese, are happier with an obese partner. So you can see there's kind of a matching here in well-being sense. In the same way the unemployed were happiest with the unemployed, as it were, here body weight seems to be matched as well within couples. And you have the same thing for men. Men who are normal weights have a preference for normal weight, if I can call it that, normal weight partners. Men who are overweight prefer overweight partners, and ditto obese men. And we can formalize that. How good are you at dummy variables? Don't we all just love dummy variables? Yeah? No, okay. Anyway, the way we can see this is that this is, again, it's a regression, so let me just read it off for you. If I'm obese but my partner isn't, my well-being is 0.16 lower. This is the GHQ scale of well-being. If my partner is obese but I'm not, my well-being is 0.1 lower. If I'm obese and my partner is obese, the effect is minus 0.16 minus 0.104 plus 0.263 equals 0. There's no effect. There's no effect. So weight doesn't matter as long as you share it with your partner. And this is true. I'm telling you true things here. And this is a semi-parametric estimation of exactly that relationship, where you know what semi-parametric estimation does. It just estimates conditional means around a distribution. And these are what I call happiness hills. I wanted to call the paper Happiness Hills, but the editor wouldn't let me, so we had to call it something else. This is the well-being of the wife in a partnership as a function of her weight and as a function of her partner's weight, her husband's weight. So you can see the bliss point here is about here, where she's got a BMI of 23 and the partner's got a BMI of about 25. So that's just on overweight is 25. What's interesting here is these hills are not symmetric. Okay? What you've got is a ridge or a saddle point stretching out to the northeast. That's a sort of bit of technical blurb. What that means in words is if I get heavier and my partner gets heavier at the same time, it actually doesn't matter. Okay? We're going along in that direction whereby well-being doesn't really change very much. You should read these like a contour map. I mean, it's exactly what they are. It's like a contour map of a country. Okay? And the same thing for men. The ridge is in the northeast direction. Okay. All right. Let me finish up with religion. And I keep on saying I'm going to finish up, and then I talk about other stuff. Now, I'm really going to finish up with religion. And I do have other things, but I'm not going to say them because we won't have time. Religion. The unemployed like being with the unemployed. Divorcees like living with divorcees. What about Protestants? Do Protestants like living with Protestants? This was my question here. Looking at religious spillovers. So you might not have seen regressions like this before. This is a happiness of Roman Catholics regression. Okay? So Catholics are happier in Catholic regions. They're less happy in Protestant regions and significantly less happy in atheist regions. Okay? Atheists are people with no stated religion. Okay? So far, so good. Catholics like Catholics. Protestants, well, they kind of like Catholics as well. Protestants kind of easygoing, right? Protestants like Catholics, Protestants like Protestants, but Protestants don't like atheists either. Okay, so we've got kind of a good match so far. This was the story I was kind of thinking of, right? That you like living with people who somehow look like you, it reassures you or something. Where this falls down is when we look at the atheists here, the no religion on the right, and you find that atheists like Catholics, atheists like Protestants, and atheists don't like atheists either. So there's something really bad about atheist regions that brings down everyone, including atheists themselves. And we don't know what this is. We've messed around with crime rates. We've messed around with religious hospitals, religious schools. We just can't quite put our finger on what this is. But religion is a good thing in this data, not only for you, but for other people as well. So I think I'm going to end with this summary slide. This is my sort of partial answer to that question of what should policy do if well-being is the goal. And when we want to look at something, we want to look for some area of life to which you do not adapt and which is not rival, in the sense that when you get more of it, that annoys me, and when I get more of it, that annoys you. Okay, so something that's permanent, non-rival. What we want in this little graph here, this little table, is a line that says no, no. No status comparisons, no adaptation. And as you can see, we're not quite there. The only one that I think works on this table is unemployment, because the comparison effect's quite small and there's no adaptation. Poverty works because there's no adaptation, but I don't know yet about the comparison effects of poverty. It's something we're working on now. But I guess the last word I would have to say on this, and if only I'd stolen one of Ed's smiley faces here, is that there's ever such a lot of question marks. And I've been working on this area for maybe 20 years, and there's still just so much stuff we don't know about this. These question marks are not there not because I'm lazy. It's because I genuinely don't know of any work that's actually shown any of this. And perhaps the other thing to say, especially in this context, is we are really bored with looking at the life satisfaction of adult Germans. Okay, we've got to start looking at other people at some point. So the more countries we can get in here with harmonized panel data sets, if necessary, the better we'll understand these phenomena. But this is where I think we are with respect to thinking of a policy for well-being. And thank you for listening to me for so long. Sorry to have gone on. Thank you. Okay, that was miles too long. But we do still have a couple of minutes for questions. I promised I'd finish early as well. So I guess I'm chairing this, so I'm going to throw it open for the infamous first question that nobody ever wants to ask. I'll look away, so okay. You can talk amongst yourselves. Hey, I may have 0 questions. Okay, Ed is microphone free, but he was brave enough to ask the first question. Thank you, Ed. I'll buy you a beer later. Social activities. We did actually look at social capital. I don't know how to measure social capital, do you? The number of times you go out per week, the number of friends you've got, the number of clubs you're a member of. We did look at this, actually, and this is one of the bits I skipped. it looks as though meeting friends is a good thing, but other people meeting friends reduces your well-being. But I don't know how to measure social capital. If I just think of it as frequency of meeting friends, then this is comparative the wrong way round as well. The more social capital I have, the less good it is for you. But I just don't know how strong those results are. It's one of the reasons I skipped over them. I'm not very happy with social capital as a kind of concept, really, though I do understand that it's important for people. Now look, the guy said to me, when there's one, there's always two. Okay, thank you.
I understand the idea of being dissatisfied with looking at West Germans, but there's so much, it seems there's so much possibility in considering what's happening in different countries. So that, I mean, if we're not sick enough yet of hearing about Danes, that would be a bit surprising. If the Danes are supposed to be the happiest, then surely we could look at what makes them different. And is it not possible also to look at what has changed for them over time? It's a very general question, but I would think a fairly obvious one.
No, you can, of course. Once you switch to country level analysis, you run into a couple of issues. One of which is just the low N problem, that you end up making these kind of not very powerful statements about Denmark is like this and then Spain's like that. And there's so many reasons why these countries differ. It's actually quite hard to pin down what it might be. And you kind of get back to the time series thing I was talking about at the beginning, where it is low powered. But you do have people who do this, and probably rightly so, including over time. And ask John Helliwell, for example, why the country ranking of happiness looks that way. And he had a chapter on this in the World Happiness Report 2012. And he will absolutely bang on to you about trust. He thinks that's fantastically important. Who was mentioning that earlier today? Trust. The lost wallet question. Did you mention that yesterday, Ed? Yeah, this is the lost wallet stuff. If you dropped your wallet in the street, do you think you'd get it back? And you can look at the percentages of people who say that. And the people who say they won't get it back, they're actually genuinely right, with people who've done replication work actually dropping wallets in the street, and you don't get them back in some countries and you do in others. So yeah, maybe trust is an obvious thing. If you ask me, I would say healthcare. Healthcare, this is one of the, what's Singaporean healthcare like? Is it like the NHS? Have you got a national health service? Can you just turn up to the hospital and you don't have to pay, right? Right, you don't know how good that is. You don't know how good that is till you don't have it anymore. And then it sucks super, super big time because you don't dare get ill. Obamacare has been just fantastic. I don't care what the premiums are, I really don't, because I know what the cost is if you suddenly have a $25,000 bill. I mean, healthcare is enormously important. Actually, someone should look at that. Why hasn't nobody looked at this? Well-being of, just the well-being of lower income potential recipients of Obamacare. We must know who these people are in BRFSS or something like that. I mean, we could do this. Someone should do this. Sorry, I'm thinking out loud. But it's actually because I don't have an answer to the question. Yeah, I would say trust healthcare. I don't know what else. See, I don't think GDP. I actually don't think crime either, that much. You know, the worst thing about crime is not crime, it's being scared of crime. And being scared of crime is actually not hugely correlated with the incidence of crime. Okay, well, you can do these comparisons of actual crimes in regions across countries. Of course, in Singapore, you'd be screwed because you don't have any regions, right? It's not Singapore. No. So you need kind of big countries, right? Where you can compare the incidence of crime to what people say about being scared of it. And they're not that brilliantly correlated, actually. I mean, it's like your fear of immigrants, you know, dislike of being with immigrants. And it's the highest in these as you know, it's highest in these mid-England towns where there aren't any. You know, oh, I can't stand all these immigrants. Like, oh yeah, where are they again? There aren't any. I mean, I know there's endogenous sorting and all of that, but yeah. Anyway, sorry, that was a really bad answer because I don't actually have one. But I would go for trust in healthcare, and I'm actually pretty excited about Obamacare in that one. I'm going to jot that one down. You remember we said no more projects, right? All right, thank you. Education. I think that's the shortest question I've ever been asked, by the way. That was you could have dropped the how about and just, you know. I like that. I like short questions. Education. Okay, what do you think? Because I know that was, sorry. I know what I think, but I don't know if anyone's going to agree with me. If you were to take a cross-section, not you, because you're all educated, right? So I need some variability. If you were to take a cross-section of society, do you think educated people are happier than less educated people?
I don't think the more educated you're more happy.
Okay. You see, I'm less clear about that. I'm less clear about that after a certain point. The trouble with education, doing empirical work on education, is it's so much of a choice variable. You know, you can choose to become educated. And of course, people who choose to become educated are different from people who don't choose to become educated. This is a point that, one of the many points that Angus Deaton makes repeatedly about fertility, for example. Why should we expect any relationship between having kids and happiness? You know, you want to have kids? Fine, go and have kids. You don't want to? Don't. You know, what's the issue here? Why should there be a correlation? So because education is chosen, you'd need to know the characteristics of the people who choose it to know whether they're confounding the average difference you'd find between educated and non-educated. And the only thing we can really sensibly do here, I'm going to teach you another economist word, another statistics word, is to instrument. We need an exogenous variation in education that somehow pushes some people to become educated when they wouldn't have been otherwise. And there aren't that many of these around. There's the school leaving age in the UK, 1973. Another infamous one is the GI Bill in the US that allowed a lot of people to go to college who couldn't have afforded it otherwise. So what you'd like to do is look at the effect of that education on happiness. Phil Oreopoulos has done that. He's in Toronto. He thinks it's positive. I've been replicating that work with a Korean ex-student of mine, and we find it negative. And those are about the only two instrumented pieces of work I know, and they're not terribly conclusive. The other work we're doing right this second is looking at spillover effects of education, and they're negative. It sucks living in an educated area. Why? Because you've opened to more competition on the labour market, presumably. This is something we're trying to work through, but the raw correlation is really negative. And I would have thought it would have been positive, and we're just not getting it, much to my co-author's disgust, because he wants it to be positive. But it's not, it's negative. So I'm not clear about that. Again, let me say that's a rich country statement. No, we don't know how lucky we are, most of us. We live in rich countries. We all get educated up to age 18. 50% of us get educated up to age 21. You know, and we're talking about, hey, should I do a master's? Should I do a professional degree? All this kind of thing. Most people in the world don't have anything like this kind of choice. Their issue is, do they ever get to go to school at all? And that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about rich country correlations. But that's a great question. And yet again, the answer is I don't know. But thank you for the question.
Thank you, Professor. I think it's a great presentation, and it makes the conference a really success. And I have a question for you. Is regarding the measure of subjective well-being. We know that most of the time the survey of the subjective well-being is based on the 10-point scale or a 5-point scale. But we know that as the country becomes richer and richer, we can have the GDP per capita from 10,000 to 20,000, 30,000. But when we are answering the question, you can only go from 0.2, 0.3, and 2.8. But after that, I think most of the people will not like to be the extremist. So most often they will not like to answer, okay, I'm extremely happy, my point will be 10, right? So eventually when the country becomes richer and richer, yes, social comparison is one of the explanation, but eventually people will never answer the 10 on average, right? So it's not like GDP can goes up continuously, right? So so this is my concern. If we really want to explain the flat curve of happiness, will the measure itself be a kind of explanation? Thank you.
That's an absolutely excellent question, actually. This is another reason not to do time series, because of the potential of somehow getting stuck at the top. So this is especially the case on the GSS. The US GSS, I mean, we all love the US GSS, the General Social Survey, but their happiness score absolutely sucks. It's, is it on a 3-point or a 4-point scale? 4-point scale. 3? I can't remember, actually. But it's on a very short scale, and maybe not the majority, but close to the majority are at the top. And of course, you've got nowhere to go. You've got nowhere to go. So of course, your average is going to be artificially biased towards being flat. The other scales we're looking at over time in the GSOEP is on a 0 to 10 scale. That's probably true in the World Values Survey as well. It's true in the Gallup World Poll, though it's the Cantrell. There you find fewer than 10% of people are stuck at the top, if you like. And there's been no phenomenon over time with more and more people in the top category. Actually, this is really interesting. What we're finding is that fewer people are in the top category over time, and fewer people are in the bottom categories. So we're actually converging towards being, meh, okay, which is nice in a way because it reduces inequality and well-being. But there's no sense in which we're all getting stuck at the top. But I love your question. I too take it seriously. In the kind of work we're doing, we do try to systematically drop the 10s just to see whether the trend amongst people who are not 10 still looks the same. And these are people who, of course, can go up over time in panel data. There has been some work on visual analog scales, VAS scales, where you don't have a number. You just have a left and a right, and you say where you are on a left-right. And you don't have that concept of, 10 is the top. I can't go higher than 10. And from memory, some of that work actually traces out the same kind of patterns we get in bounded scales. But I totally respect the point you make. It's a problem for time series. It's not a problem for all that work I'm doing showing comparisons. That's still holding no matter what the scale is. So I think it is a problem for the macro time series stuff. I don't think it's a problem for the individual comparisons literature. But very good point. Thanks.
If you had 5 minutes with the head of state of a nation.
Well, time's up. So I did that.
And in this nation, the unemployment rate was 2.1%. There was fairly low poverty. trust, perhaps it could be improved, but let's say it's doing okay. And let's say people are somewhat satisfied but somewhat dissatisfied with healthcare, but it's being worked on. What would you say? But let me just add on one more thing. So it's kind of a loaded question because I'm a social psychologist and I want to hear your perspective, an economist's perspective. And can you say something about social comparison? Because I think that is what is driving a little bit of the discontent in this nation.
Yeah. The things I haven't talked about that I could think of, I mean, cool, 2.1% unemployment, I wouldn't mind that. I haven't seen that one for about 50 years. The things we could do, well, some I can cheat because there are areas that I didn't talk about that I do think are terribly important, such as environment. So all of this has been static analysis. There's no sense in things that we could do that are good for the future. And of course, environmental degradation is just borrowing off of our children, right? So that would be a cheap answer for me to give you. Let me give you a slightly better one. The parallel big project I've been involved with for about 5 years now is on the family and childhood sources of adult success, both in economics terms, things like unemployment, education and income, but also in psychological terms, in terms of emotional health and life satisfaction. The big driver of adult life satisfaction is adult emotional health. The big driver of adult emotional health is childhood emotional health. What we want to understand is how to make kids do better in terms of how they feel about themselves. And my co-author on this project, Richard Layard, has been involved with setting up intervention in childhood mental health, where you can, if we do standard kind of cost-benefit analysis, you're really happy if you get a return of 10% or something like that. I mean, that's really good. That's better than the interest rate, right? Interventions in childhood mental health, you're looking at returns of 100, 200, 300%. These are gigantic returns. And it's super underinvested in. So I think that is, this is nothing to do with this presentation, but if you wanted me to identify an area where I think we could really do with more investment, it would just be helping kids as they are adolescents. Adolescents have a terrible time, maybe more these days than we did when I was a kid. I mean, when I was a kid and you were bullied at school, then you were bullied at school and someone would slap you, then you go home and that was it, it's all done, right? Now somebody slaps you at school and then they send you insulting messages all day long, all night long. It's really high pressure, very intensive, quite unpleasant peer interaction. And if we could work with kids to give them tools to deal with that, that would be a good thing. Okay, that was my half-cheap answer. Here's my quite serious answer, and this is in terms of what we've worked on here. I don't know if we all need to be or must be so positional. Positionality may come from our development 6 million years ago on the steppes where we had to fight over food and mates and things like this. Maybe it's a sort of developmental fit. The person who was quickest got the most food and their genes were passed on and so on. But maybe there are ways of growing up now where we can stop being comparative. And again, I'm thinking of quite early childhood interventions, programs about things that are important to you. Mindfulness programs in schools, why not? Why not? They don't cost much. The returns could be absolutely huge. So I don't know if social comparison is a fatality. Maybe there are ways of educating ourselves not to have it, and it's unclear that it serves any purpose to us at the individual level and at the societal level. So that would be something I would think I would like to see more work on and more investment in. That was an answer, wasn't it, actually? I did quite well there. I usually don't, I usually don't have answers. Thanks. Okay, I reckon that really did at that time. It's 17:03. I'm 3 minutes over, so I hereby declare this address finished, and thank you all so much for staying on. Thank you.